Indonesia AirAsia Flight 8501, carrying 156 passengers, is cruising high above the Java Sea when the aircraft is suddenly rolling sharply to the left. It's not responding, it's not correcting. The aircraft has taken on a life of its own, climbing higher and higher, while the pilots struggle to regain control. Then inexplicably they start to drop altitude. The aircraft is plummeting from the sky, speeding toward the Java Sea below. It seems the pilots cannot do anything to save their aircraft. This story is about human error, training deficiencies, and miscommunication. This is the story of Indonesia AirAsia Flight 8501. On Christmas Day, December 25th, 2:01 for a passenger flight was set to depart from Surabaya. Their destination was Kuala Lumpur, the capital of Malaysia. The aircraft for this flight was an Airbus, a 320. It was 6 years old and had accumulated approximately 23,000 flight hours. During pushback and after both engines had started, an unexpected message was displayed on the ECAP. The captain returned the aircraft to the parking bay and reported the issue to maintenance. An engineer came to the cockpit to check and help the pilots diagnose the problem. After consulting the troubleshooting, the engineer reset the circuit breakers for flight augmentation computers. One end-to-end conducted a built-in test, which resolved the problem. The flight augmentation computer on an Airbus aircraft controls inputs to the rudder trim and yaw damper, which are crucial for the aircraft's stability. The captain and the engineer engaged in a discussion. The captain asked whether he could perform the same reset action whenever the problem reappeared. The engineer stated that the pilot may reset whenever instructed on the ECAM. The aircraft was then ready for departure. During pushback and after starting engine 2, the message reappeared on the ECAM. The pilots performed the ECAM act. However, the problem still exists. The engineer, who had performed the initial rectification, saw that the aircraft did not move. He took over the interphone and communicated with the pilots. The captain asked the engineer if he could reset the system by pulling the circuit breakers. The engineer confirmed that they could proceed with this action. However, after the co-pilot reset the circuit break, the problem still persists, leading the engineer to advise the pilots to return the aircraft to the gate, disembark the passengers, and wait in the terminal building, since the rectification might take a long time. The engineer consulted the troubleshooting manual, which recommended replacing flight augmentation computer 2. Upon realizing that no spare was available at the Surabaya maintenance store, the engineer obtained a replacement from another aircraft undergoing maintenance. After installing the new the engineer requested the pilots to start both engines to verify functionality. Following the power interruption, after both engines started, the problem did not reappear. The captain was satisfied with the rectification and advised that they were ready to depart. The aircraft then flew from Surabaya to Kuala Lumpur and returned without further problem. The engineer didn't realize then that the problem wasn't with the flight computer but with the rudder travel limiter, explicitly involving the circuit board. These boards showed soldering cracks that could disrupt electrical continuity, leading to failures in the rudder travel limiter unit, or RTLU. These cracks likely resulted from thermal cycle associated with changes between powered and non-powered conditions and transitions between ground and flight states. This loss of electrical continuity was the actual cause of the RTLU failure. Despite the engineer's efforts and the replacement of flight augmentation computer 2, the underlying issue with the rudder travel limiter went unresolved, setting the stage for potential catastrophic consequence. On December 28, 156 passengers boarded Indonesia AirAsia Flight 8501 at Juanda International Airport in Surabaya, Indonesia. The same Airbus A320 on which the flight augmentation computer 2 had been replaced 3 days prior, was piloted by the same captain, though accompanied by a different first officer. This time, the captain was 53-year-old Irian, an Indonesian national. He began his aviation career in the Indonesian Air Force at a young age and spent a decade piloting F-5 and F-16 fighter jet. Following his military service and early retirement, he transitioned to commercial aviation. He had over 20,000 flying hours. Alongside him was 46-year-old First Officer Remy Emmanuel Plus. He had more than 2,000 flying hours. In this flight, the first officer acted as the pilot flying, and the captain acted as the pilot monitoring. Before departure, the pilots reviewed the weather and their route. Flight 8501 was scheduled to travel from Surabaya, Indonesia to Singapore Changi Airport, crossing the Java Sea along the route. This journey typically takes about 2.5 hours. They noted thunderstorms and areas of towering cumulonimbus clouds along the route, with cloud tops ranging from 24,000 feet to 44,000 feet. Prevailing westerly winds were blowing at 15 to 20 knots, and temperatures at cruising altitude ranged from -56 degrees to -62 degrees. Flight 85 01 was ready for takeoff. After receiving clearance, the aircraft was pushed back from the gate and made its way to the run. A few moments later at 5 a.m. local time, the aircraft took off, beginning its climb. Just 14 minutes after takeoff, the aircraft had climbed to its cruising altitude of 32,000 feet, known as flight level 320, ready for the journey across the Java Sea. Due to the towering clouds in the area and the outside temperature of -62 degrees Celsius, the first officer activated the aircraft's anti-ice system to prevent the formation of ice on the aircraft's wings and engines, which can affect performance and safety. Concurrently, the flight attendant announced to the passengers to return to their seats and fasten their seatbelt due to the weather conditions and the possibility of encountering turbulence. During the flight, barely 30 minutes into the flight and cruising at an altitude of 32,000 feet, the master caution light was triggered, accompanied by an advisory message on the ECAM. The captain recognized this alert because he had encountered it multiple times. 3 days prior, however, this time it didn't occur during taxiing. Instead, it occurred during the flight. Flying high above the Java Sea, the first officer read and performed the ECAM act to set both flight augmentation computers, push buttons to off and then to on. Both rudder travel limiter units returned to function. Normally, a rudder travel limiter is a critical safety device in an aircraft that restricts the maximum movement of the rudder. The rudder is a primary control surface located at the tail of an aircraft, and it helps to control the yaw. At lower speeds, the rudder travel limiter allows for greater rudder to facilitate sharp turn. At higher speeds, it restricts rudder deflection that could compromise the aircraft's structural integrity and stability. With the fault resolved, the crew's attention shifted from the ECAM to the onboard weather radar. They noticed a large storm looming in the distance. The captain requested a deviation of 15 miles to the left of the track to avoid the weather, which was approved. The aircraft then altered its course to a heading of 310 degrees. Thunderstorms posed the most significant risk to aircraft. Among all weather conditions, they often contain hail, heavy rainfall, lightning, ice, strong winds, and supercooled water droplets, potentially damaging an aircraft. Under extreme circumstances, pilots make every effort to steer clear of thunderstorms whenever feasible to ensure the safety of the flight. Shortly after, a second failure occurred on both rudder travel limiter units, signaling with a chime and the illumination of the master caution light. Once again, the same message appeared on the ECAM. The pilots promptly repeated the ECAM act, and both rudder travel limiter units resumed normal function. The pilots contacted air traffic control in Jakarta, informing them that the flight had turned left off its planned route to avoid the bad weather conditions. This update was acknowledged and tracked on the radar screen by the controller. The controller then instructed the pilots to report once they had cleared the weather. Shortly afterward, the pilots requested to climb to 38,000 feet, if possible, to which they were advised to stand by. Regrettably, this marked the final radio communication. Once again, a single chime sounded, accompanied by an ECAM message. This marked the third failure of both rudder travel limiter units. During this flight, following the ECAM procedure, the pilots took action, and the system returned to normal function. But 2 minutes later, the master caution light and the same message appeared on the ECAM. This was now the fourth occurrence, and the captain pondered what else he could do. Instead of repeating the same action for the fourth time, which seemed to yield no results, then something struck his memory. The captain had seen the engineer reset the FAC circuit breakers on the ground to eliminate this problem. He even asked the engineer whether he could perform the same reset action whenever the problem reappeared, but this time they weren't on the ground, where a maintenance technician could help them. This time they were flying high above the Java Sea. In the Airbus A320 Quick Reference Handbook, the chapter titled Computer Reset states that in flight, as a general rule, the crew must restrict computer resets to those listed in the table. Before taking action on other computers, the flight crew must consider and fully understand the consequence. Having experienced witnessing and performing flight augmentation computer circuit breaker resets, the captain might assume he fully understands the consequences. Notably, the fact circuit breakers were not included in the table of the Quick Reference Handbook, and the consequences of resetting them in flight are not described in Airbus document. The crew should have deliberated the consequences of resetting the circuit breaker to assess the risks and devise an action plan, as outlined in crew coordination during emergency or abnormalities procedures. However, the captain deviates from this protocol, and merely 54 seconds after the fourth master caution warning appears, he resets the circuit breaker. It's a decision he will soon regret. Immediately after resetting the circuit breakers, the fifth master caution warning is sounded. in the cockpit, accompanied by multiple notifications on the ECAM. Resetting the circuit breakers caused an electrical interruption, leading to the disengagement of the autopilot and auto thrust system, and the control logic transition from normal law to alternate law. This means the aircraft had lost several computerized protections designed to maintain it within safe operational limits. In addition, the rudder deflected 2 degrees to the left, causing the aircraft to roll up to a 54-degree angle of bank. This roll rate was twice as fast as the standard roll rate operation, due to the multiple ECAM messages appearing. After the autopilot disconnect, the pilots did not notice this roll movement as they were distracted. It wasn't until 9 seconds later that the first officer took control of the right side stick. The initial response of the first officer was to pull the stick backward and then to the right, reaching maximum deflect. This action reduced the aircraft's roll angle to 9 degrees left. The rapid rolling movement to the right might have induced an excessive sensation of rolling to the right. Subsequently, possibly disoriented from the rapid right, the first officer let the aircraft bank to the left. Again, it's not responding. It's not correcting. The input on the right side stick was mostly pitch up, and the aircraft climbed up with a climb rate of up to 11,000 feet per minute. The aircraft continued banking left, and as it climbed, it started to lose speed. A few minutes ago, everything seemed fine, but Flight 8501 had now turned into a true nightmare. The captain observed the situation and urgently instructed the first officer to pull down. Repeatedly, pull down, pull down. His choice of words was confusing. The side stick can be either pushed down or pulled up. The command pull down is contradictory and could be interpreted differently. In response to this unclear command, the first officer continued to pull up, triggering the stall warning. As the aircraft continued its rapid climb, a stall occurs when the aircraft's wings can no longer generate enough lift to sustain its flight. Lift is the force generated by the airflow over the wing. When the airflow over the wings becomes disrupted, typically due to an excessively high angle of attack, the wings lose their ability to generate lift. Effectively, this loss of lift results in a sudden decrease in the aircraft's ability to stay airborne. The captain continued yelling to pull down, followed by pitch-up commands from the first officer. The captain felt the need to take action and reached for his side stick, while the first officer also controlled his. When one pilot operates the side stick, it sends control signals to the computers based on the priority logic. However, when both pilots move both side sticks simultaneously in the same or opposite direction, and neither takes priority, the system combines the signals algebraically. The 2 green side stick priority lights are illuminated during this time, followed by a dual input voice message activation. Dual input, however, this was not audible because the stall warning had already been activated. The sum of both side stick inputs commanded nose up pitch as the first officer pulled almost fully back, while the captain pushed the nose down slightly. The pitch up input resulted in the angle of attack reaching a maximum of 48 degrees, which was beyond the flight director's envelope, and the flight director disappeared. The aircraft reached the highest altitude of 38,000 feet and the largest roll angle of 104 degrees to the left. Then inexplicably it started to drop altitude. Flight 8501 was plummeting from the sky up to 20,000 feet per minute, speeding toward the Java Sea below. The stall warning sounded in the cockpit, but the pilots did not understand what was happening. The captain commanded the first officer to select air data to Cap 3. This action would transfer the air data source from Air Data Inertial Reference Unit 1 to 3. The captain might have assumed that an air data error had triggered the rapidly fluctuating airspeed indication, but nothing could be further from the truth. The incredibly low speed he was seeing was indeed the actual speed. They had only a minute left to prevent a disaster. It seemed the pilots couldn't do anything to save their aircraft. The pilots tried to do what they could, but the first officer kept pulling his side stick backward. This action prevented the aircraft from recovering from the stall, and the aircraft continued to fall. The bad weather only compounded the situation. The pilots lacked a visible horizon as a reference point, making it difficult to discern their position in the sky. Hold on. Both pilots persisted in their efforts to save the aircraft until it was too late. At 20 minutes past 6 that morning, the aircraft crashed into the Java Sea, disintegrating upon impact and sinking to the seabed. All 162 people on board perished instantly. Shortly after the aircraft was confirmed missing, a search operation was launched. The wreckage was quickly discovered. Among the recovered debris were sections of the empennage, including parts of the rear fuselage, the vertical stabilizer, and the rudder. Another retrieved section was the fuselage, containing the center fuselage, wings, and both main landing gears. Additionally, several smaller parts such as passenger seat, escape slides, and interior panel were found floating and were recovered. approximately 30 nautical miles southeast of the main wreckage site. The official search for bodies ended in March 2015. After 116 bodies had been recovered, 46 bodies remained unaccounted for. The investigation concluded that several factors contributed to this accident. The cracking of a solder joint in both channels A and B of the electronic modules of the rudder travel limiter unit resulted in a loss of electrical continuity. This resulted in unresolved, repetitive ECAM messages occurring at shorter intervals. Following the fourth fault, the captain reset the fact circuit breakers, causing an electrical interruption to the flight augmentation computers. The interruption led to the autopilot disengaging and the flight control logic transitioning from normal law to alternate law. Consequently, the rudder deflected 2 degrees to the left, causing the aircraft to roll up to a 54-degree angle of bank. Subsequent actions by the flight crew, combined with the aircraft being in alternate law, resulted in the inability to control the aircraft within the standard flight envelope. Ultimately, this led to the aircraft entering a prolonged stall condition that exceeded the capability of the flight crew to recover. An angle of attack of 40 degrees was beyond the competency of any airline pilot trained, as they had never been trained for or experienced such a scenario.